What is a thesis statement? A thesis statement is the central claim or primary argument of a text. In academic writing, a thesis statement is the central argument of your paper. It's what you'll need to explain and support with your body paragraphs. A thesis statement is typically at the beginning of an academic paper, often in the first paragraph of an essay that's fewer than 10 pages or so. So we'll talk about 5 qualities of a good thesis statement: that it makes a claim, that it is contestable, that it includes a plan of development, that it has tension, and that it evolves with your paper. So let's walk through each of these. First, your thesis statement needs to make a claim. This is what makes a thesis a thesis. Your thesis statement must convey some sort of claim or argument that the rest of your paper supports. This unifies your paper and the argument that it puts forth. Without a claim, you won't have the driving point necessary to write a cohesive, coherent essay. So let's look at a couple of examples here. So these 2 thesis statements are the ones that we'll look at throughout this video. Although standardized tests, such as the SAT, are usually considered a valid way to assess students and they are widely used in college admissions, these tests do not accurately reflect a student's knowledge or ability. So that's thesis statement number 1. So we'll see that this claim is at the very end of this thesis statement. This claim is that these tests do not accurately reflect a student's knowledge or ability. So that's the argument that you can expect a paper that has this thesis statement to put forth. Our next thesis statement is this one. Despite their high-tech special effects, today's graphically violent horror movies do not convey the creative use of cinematography or the emotional impact that we saw in the classic horror films of the 1940s and 50s. So here's our claim for this thesis statement, that today's graphically violent horror movies don't convey the creative use of cinematography or the emotional impact that we saw in older movies, in older classic horror movies. So you can expect a paper to talk about how older horror movies do a better job of this than newer ones. Next, your thesis statement needs to be contestable. That means you need to be able to disagree with it. Your claim must be one that someone can disagree with. Your claim should not just be a matter of fact or something that's so hypothetical as to be unknowable or not worth arguing. If you can't formulate a plausible disagreement to your claim, then your thesis may not be contestable. So let's look at our 2 example thesis statements here, and let's imagine how someone might disagree with them. First, this argument about the SAT. Someone might disagree and say that the SAT does predict how well a person will do in college, as well as how smart they are. In the second thesis statement, someone might argue that due to the capabilities of CGI, modern horror movies are scarier than ever, that maybe they're actually better than older films. Next, your thesis statement needs to have a plan of development. Your thesis statement should have a roadmap of how the paper will support that main claim. This can be a short list of the reasons you'll provide in your paper, or it can be more of an articulation of ideas. For a longer paper, you'll likely see the latter. So in the 2 thesis statements we have here, you'll see that it is more of an articulation of ideas rather than a short list. So here we have those examples. In that first thesis statement about standardized tests, you could expect to see a paper that would talk about what might or might not show a student's knowledge or ability. In that second thesis statement, you can expect a paper that's going to talk about details of cinematography, talk about the emotional impact of film, and then also address some aspect of classic horror movies. Your thesis statement should also have tension. This is also called a qualification. So this is an idea that your central claim can push against. It makes your central claim worth arguing. Now, this is not the same as setting out to overturn one idea in favor of another. More often, what happens is that the thesis statement's primary idea emerges as some kind of clarification or reworking of another idea, that tension. So in this first thesis statement, you'll notice that we have this very beginning section that kind of talks a little bit before you have that punch of that main claim. So that's the tension. Although standardized tests, such as the SAT, are usually considered a valid way to assess students, and they're widely used in college admissions. So this is an idea that bumps up against that main claim. This is an idea that says, well, wait a minute. Are these tests accurate? Because we use them so often. So this is a contrasting idea that gives more legitimacy to that central claim. So if you just had that claim, these tests do not accurately reflect a student's knowledge or ability, someone might say, okay, but so what, right? So by having that tension, that idea that that claim bumps up against, it makes it seem more legitimate, more worth arguing. So in the second thesis statement, that first bit, despite their high-tech special effects, that's again a contrasting idea that this claim about older horror movies being better than newer ones bumps up against. So one might think that because we have all of this special technology, that newer horror movies might be better. However, this paper argues that they're not. Finally, your thesis statement needs to evolve with your paper. Keep in mind that your thesis statement is not static. The one that you write at the beginning of your writing process isn't necessarily the one that you'll stick with. You may begin the drafting stage by writing a preliminary thesis statement. However, you should continue to revisit your thesis statement while you're writing and after you've written to ensure that what you're arguing in your body paragraphs and what you promise in your thesis statement match each other. Be willing to dwell in the writing process and to circle back to pieces of writing.